Hello everybody, my name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author and robot, and today we're going to be talking about a new calling by Sylvian Breker. It was a story that was featured on the Fresh Meat feature, the first Fresh Meat feature on this channel, and we'll get into how I got my hands on it and exactly why we're here in just a second. But before we get started, a couple of things on the channel. Number one, if you enjoy what I do here, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. It lets me know that you guys are enjoying this kind of content. Number two, if you would like to be featured on this channel, check out the two links in the description below. Lemoi is the local prompt contest. I give you a prompt, you write a short story, submit it, and first video of the month is always about what you guys come up with. Number two, there is the Fresh Meat feature, the new program on the channel where if you're an indie author with a published book or a soon-to-be published book, if you would like it read here on the channel, then you submit your first chapter, and every week I pick a random story, except for that first week of the month because I switch stuff around for Lemoi. But I dip into that random pool, and hopefully readers can find new content to enjoy, kind of like this. So that's been pretty fun so far. Now something a little bit different. The next thing I'd like to announce is that my upcoming book, Boom Boom Boom, should be hitting ARCs very, very soon, so stay tuned for announcements if you would like to get an advanced reader copy of that. It is a political satire of sorts, mostly satire, only political because we're making fun of the feds, but that's just how that goes. And if you want some extra fun content, head over to Year of the Author, where she and I will be hanging out on Saturdays, and she does live streams like 2 or 3 other times of the week, just so long as you don't miss the loin stream, okay? There's all of that. Now we're going to go ahead and get into the actual book review. So I happened upon this book because the author actually sent it to me in an email and asked if I would read it and give it a book review, which that is initially why I was going to read the book. But then while I was in the middle of reading this, I came up with the idea for the Fresh Meat feature. And since I hadn't actually put the casting call out yet, since that's basically what it is, I asked her if I could make her book the first for the Fresh Meat feature, and thankfully and gratefully on my part, she said that I could read her first chapter for the Fresh Meat feature. So there is that. So don't worry about like every book that I read for the Fresh Meat feature, I'm going to do a full book review of. This book, there's a lot to talk about with for a lot of different reasons, and I'm actually very excited to share it with you because there's so much to talk about. Now that's not necessarily the same reason that I was excited to talk about Dracula's Guest, but I also really just like books that I can, you can get really, really into just talking about the content and the story and what it looked like the author was doing and what interpretations are. And I think there's so much content to actually talk about in this book that I encourage you to pick up the book yourself and come back and have a discussion, or just give me, whatever thoughts you get from the story down below. But I would love to talk about this book. With that said, this novel is book 1 in what I think is going to be a trilogy. It is not a standalone novel at the very least. So as I go through the synopsis and my thoughts on everything, keep that in mind, because maybe some of the stuff that's introduced will be answered later in the future. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to ask questions now for things that feel like they got dropped off for me as a reader reading the first book. Just know that in those questions, I'm also keeping an open mind that things might get resolved in the future. But I have no way of knowing that. One final thing before we get into the synopsis, just so you know, this story is a shipwreck of a teenage girl, okay? It's gonna be a rough one. And not at all what I was expecting when I saw Edward Cullen's name in the blurb. Okay, so open up with Alyssa at her father's house party. She's watching her much older boyfriend, Sean, kiss another woman. This is because Sean is, well, he's her dad's friend, and she's underage. It's not really a healthy relationship yet, but it's also not a legal one. Anyways, Alyssa gets jealous and goes outside with some other guy closer to her age. The guy's trying to get some action with Alyssa, but she really is not interested in this guy. If you listen to the Fresh Meat feature, she called him shitbag. In the midst of him asking Alyssa to suck his dick, Sean shows up. A brief fight results in Alyssa retreating to her room, where she and Sean make up with quickie sex. When he's leaving the room, he runs into Alyssa's dad on the way out, but Alyssa's quick, like she's done this before, and her dad's none the wiser of what happened. Sean leaves without further incident. Now we time skip to Alyssa waking up on a plane in London as she's going to live with her mother because some drama happened at home. After an awkward reunion because mother and daughter have a strained, distant relationship, they get back to Alyssa's mom's house where Alyssa learns that her mother is living with a female roommate. Alyssa is pretty sure that her mother is seeing this girl, even though her mom said that this woman is just living there to help pay the mortgage. Alyssa is like pretty dang sure they're also in a relationship. So she doesn't buy the renting a room thing. Even when she runs into roommate Katie's boyfriend Douglas, she's still like, but then are they in a threesome? Because she's pretty sure that they're together, even though they're all like, we're not all together. Anyway, with Katie in the guest room, that means that Alyssa has to be moved to the attic, which her mom has decked out for her to have as a living space. Her dad calls using the mother's phone to connect because Alyssa says she lost her phone. Her dad doesn't need to know that by losing her phone, she means she threw it out the window at her mother's house because Sean, her now ex-boyfriend, wouldn't stop calling her, so she lost it. Alyssa goes back downstairs where she runs into Douglas, who's like, you want to go party with us tonight? And she's like, ew, no, I hate people. Why are they like this? Next thing we know, Alyssa's waking up and going downstairs to use the bathroom. She runs into the boyfriend, naked, getting out of the shower. She tells him to finish up so that she can have her turn. Also, she misses home, her dog, and her dad. While walking through the neighborhood, Alyssa comes across a bar with a help wanted sign in the window and approaches. Here, she meets a boy her age named Elliot, who apparently works at the bar and knows her mother through his dad. Alyssa asks for a job, and despite having no references, phone number, or CV, she's told to come back tomorrow to meet someone who might be able to actually give her a position. Returning home, she's alone until Katie gets back eventually. Alyssa retreats upstairs, but on her way there, she slips into her mother's room where she sort of starts investigating things, and she finds a loose board on the ground. In that loose board is a box with a photo of her mother when she was young and also just a detached broomstick. She shoves everything back where it was, feeling guilty that she was snooping, and goes back to bed. The next morning, Alyssa's mother wakes her up. They're on the way to the new school that Alyssa has to do an interview for to see if she can attend. Alyssa's mother is like, would you stop just snooping around stuff? It's none of your business. Yeah. And Alyssa doesn't want to fess up that she was sneaking around, but eventually she says fine. So now we're at the school interview, and I'm not entirely sure that I get this because it's said to be a public school, but she has to do an interview to be accepted, and I'm not familiar with the UK or London school district, so you'll have to let me know if that's how that works, but I really didn't understand it being a public school and then having an entrance interview, because that seems like a private school thing. Anyway, after the interview, she pretty much bombs the interview, by the way, because she's kind of a mess. But after the interview is over, Mom pretty much ditches Alyssa. And so she has to find her own way home after going on the tour of the facilities. So after she is done with the tour, she's pretty much lost her way as she's going. And she kind of wanders around the school and starts working herself up within her own thoughts until she's punching a locker until it dents and her hand is bloody. This creates enough noise that a man we will now formally call haughty teacher Damian Cross comes out of a classroom to confront Alyssa. He pins her to a locker, and Alyssa is sure that he's about to kiss her or suck her neck, like suck her blood or something like that. I don't know. Something weird's going on here, and she's having flashbacks to a time a homeless man said he wanted to eat her fingers, because that apparently happened at some point in her past. Kids come out of the classrooms after hearing the ruckus, and haughty teacher Damian Cross backs off. Alyssa is like, oof, that man is fine. But she is speeding herself out of the hallway with only one more glance back, going, there he stood, all dark and dangerous and absolutely stunning, exactly where I'd left him. Alyssa returns to the pub she initially visited and is given a job immediately. She works a shift with flying colors and is even given another opportunity to prove herself. She takes a shortcut through the woods to get back to her home. Once there, she runs into Douglas smoking pot, and he invites her to join. She does for a little bit and says the weed's pretty good. Douglas asks if Alyssa has a boyfriend, and she's like, yeah, I'm just gonna nope out of this situation later. Katie soon follows with her phone, saying Alyssa's father has called the phone, and he's bothering her now about, well, why haven't you gotten a new phone yet? I know you've got the money. You said you were going to get a new phone. Why didn't you get a new phone? And at that moment, Alyssa's father purchases Katie's phone right off of her to make sure that Alyssa has a phone, because he does over-monitor her, but he also kind of neglects her at the same time. We've got this weird situation going on. After the call, Alyssa goes to bed and she masturbates, first thinking of her boyfriend, Sean, or her ex-boyfriend, Sean, and then she chases off those thoughts with hottie teacher Damien Cross action because, yeah, Alyssa does have a problem with boundaries and older men. She's pretty much like, God, I'm so messed up. And then she falls asleep. The next morning, Alyssa receives her acceptance to the school, and I'm gonna go ahead and assume that hottie teacher Damien Cross had something to do with this, because I don't know exactly why, but I'm gonna blame him because something is really sus here. Alyssa goes to work where she and Elliot flirt, though it's mostly her teasing Elliot and then their boss being like, so when are you going out on a date? Alyssa's on schedule for the long term. After another successful day and getting so many tips, she's impressed so many people. She's now on schedule long term, and everybody is like, you're the best waitress that has ever existed, even though this is pretty much your first job. She's a charmer and an overachiever. I'd like to credit this to something supernatural going on with her, but I think it's just leaning into a trope for YA where the main character just gets everything they want and succeeds at everything they do, which is disappointing. That's just my assessment after kind of some of the other stuff that came through in this story and a little bit of conversation with the author. I wish it just leaned a little bit more into the storytelling and the supernatural, because there are all of the elements here, especially with the attraction and whatever the father's light or the supernatural thing is going on with her that's sort of hinted at later. It could all make all of this make so much more sense if it just was leaned into as part of the mystical trope, as opposed to just being a YA trope of girl good at everything, every guy wants to bang her. But I digress. Alyssa goes home and tells her mother about school, but mom ignores her. Her phone rings and it's not her dad. It's the ex-boyf, Sean, already having gotten her new number. She hangs up. He keeps calling Alyssa and she's like, oh my gosh, he's gonna sweet talk himself back into my life if I let him talk to me, so I can't talk to him. At school, Alyssa's wondering if she's going insane because her locker... At school, Alyssa's wondering if she's going insane because all of the lockers are fixed, and things shouldn't be this easy. Also, you get to choose your own classes at the school. So one of the classes Alyssa chose is art, and in this class, she becomes friends with this girl named Eva, who is deaf and also very good at drawing. Despite being pretty dysfunctional and misanthropic, Alyssa immediately loves this girl for no apparent reason. Then, during break, some boy named Collins comes and hits on Alyssa, but it doesn't take because she's not interested in boys her age. Continuing with class schedule, Alyssa goes to religious education. I don't know why she chose this religious class if she dreads the idea so much that she calls it brainwashing on her way there, but we're here and she actually chose to take the class. Fortunately, even though she hates the subject, hottie teacher Damien Cross walks in to teach, and my soul left my body. After class, hottie teacher Damien Cross asks Alyssa to stay behind. There, he thinks that she might benefit from some tutoring, so he asks her to go check in with some girl named Sam. Now, just to make sure that you're keeping up with all of this, like I was, Alyssa now has school, work, detention, and tutoring pretty much every day. I'm not sure how all of this is fitting together, but that's what's been assigned. After class, Alyssa actually decides to check out the tutor and see what she's like, but also to tell her that she's not interested. However, Sam invites Alyssa to come and join a dance club for some reason. Alyssa then goes to detention, and the punishment there is to clean a large hall alongside Collins. The two of them flirt, they end up making out, and then they get interrupted by hottie teacher Damien Cross. Alyssa goes home, but not without getting one more look at the master of absolute hotness on her way out. Flashback to a couple of years ago, Alyssa's dad's out of town on business. Alyssa's in trouble at school for punching someone in the face. Sean picks her up and takes her home. This whole scene between them at the house is pretty sketchy, if not unbelievably sketchy, in the pedophile way. because he's obviously grooming Alyssa here, talking to this probably 13-year-old girl or younger about sex before kissing her on the lips and telling her that she's special and very mature for her age. Back to the present, Collins and Alyssa are leaving school together, with Collins pretty much thinking that he and Alyssa are now an item because they swapped spit. He's bothering Alyssa about going on a date, but Alyssa's like, no, dude, we're not what you think was happening. Alyssa sees Sam at the gate waiting for her and also talking to haughty teacher Damien Cross. I'm not really sure how he got outside ahead of them since he dismissed them and he wasn't walking with them, but somehow he was out there. Anyway, Alyssa goes off with Sam to some abandoned-looking dance studio for practice, and at this point it's absolutely feels like Sam is in some kind of cult trying to pull Alyssa in with her. It's probably a death cult. After doing some dancing for a little while, Sam's sister Maya shows up and is going to kick them out when she asks Alyssa to show some of the work that she's done if she's really a dancer. So then Maya is super impressed because Alyssa's good at everything she does the first time she does it, and she invites Alyssa to quit her job and become part of the cult. Dance company. It's definitely a cult. Alyssa's not sure that she wants to quit her job, though, and Maya won't accept split loyalties or split time, if you want to call it that. The next day, Sam comes looking for Alyssa to pressure her into a decision because this is totally not making the situation look even more sketch. Alyssa bows and says that she will join the cult and quit her job, even though she's lying about planning to quit her job. Collins teases Alyssa until she's pissed off. After school, Collins comes looking for her to apologize. As they're leaving school, they run into none other than Predator ex-boyfriend, Sean, standing at the gate. Sean's ready to take Alyssa home and talk. While Alyssa's fighting her desires to comply, haughty teacher Damien Cross comes up and asks her if she's alright, if everything's alright, because that guy over there with the car is kind of looking sketchy, and who is that? She says it's her uncle, and everything is fine, then throws herself in the car, and they're off. This is when Sean is like, okay, it's time to return to the US, you don't need to be here, why are you like this? At the house, she rushes inside to try to avoid Sean, but he apologizes for everything that's happened. He goes inside with her, and the two of them have sex. Kind of hard sex, because I feel like a bunch of the times it mentions them having sex, it's so hard that it causes Alyssa to bleed afterwards, because she bleeds this time too, I'm pretty sure. After they're done with that, Sean goes away saying he'll come back for a visit another time soon. Alyssa goes to work and has difficulty keeping up with her new workload between everything that's going on. She doesn't want to quit the job because she likes it. Afterwards, Elliot's waiting for Alyssa outside and asks her to go on a date. She says no. She heads home to see a haughty teacher, Damien Cross, sneaking out of her house, and she's like, that guy banging my mom? Inside, Alyssa buys some pot from Douglas before going for a walk in the woods. While sitting on a swing, she's attacked by some creature feature, dog, beast, possibly a werewolf. Something scares it off, and I'm still not entirely sure what that was that did scare it off. Maybe it had to do with her superpowers, but it got bloody, blown up, and ran off. And all while that happens, Alyssa's pretty sure that she's just high. Alyssa ignores all the doctor's orders and goes back to school. She did get damaged pretty bad in that interaction, though. She's got like a cast and a couple of broken issues, or a splint, whatever. She's got a couple of broken issues, though, so she can't really use her arm. And she's on some massive pain pills. But ignoring all of the doctor's orders, she goes to school where pretty much everything that was going to happen happens anyway, and none of the scenes really mattered up until haughty teacher Damien Cross asks Alyssa to stay behind so that he can talk to her after class. In their meeting, she asks him if he's sleeping with her mom, and he's like, no. And then she eventually confesses up that she was attacked by like a werewolf thing. She leaves and runs into Sam, who invites her to come to the dance group, even though she's got a cast on and can't participate. On the way to leaving, she runs into Sean, who wants to bang again. I get the feeling that he's a kind of sex maniac at this point. Collins sees Alyssa being intimate with Sean and walks away, sad. Hope for a future together. Shot. Alyssa then goes to work and stays on the till, again, proving that her wounds don't really mean anything, because even though she was supposed to stay on the till, she also went and served tables, and she still got a ton of of tips, and it made me think too much of Gwen breaking her leg and that not actually of and it made me think too much of Gwen breaking her leg and Cyborg Tinker and that actually having no effect on the plot whatsoever. After Alyssa gets off work, she goes outside and sees hottie teacher Damian Cross talking to Elliot about not getting caught doing something, but it's too vague and we have no idea what they're talking about, and Alyssa feels bad eavesdropping, so she decides to just run off at that point. For the next week, Elliot is cold to Alyssa. She eventually confronts him about it and he says nothing. The scene ends abruptly rather than seeing the confrontation to an end. Now Alyssa's considering quitting her job for real to join Maya's cult because Elliot's being a little bitch. So now not only is Elliot avoiding Alyssa, but so is Collins, and Alyssa's avoiding hottie. So not only is Elliot avoiding Alyssa, so is Collins, and Alyssa is avoiding hottie teacher Damian Cross. Enter a completely different bizarre venture as Alyssa throws herself into work on an artistic project with Eva. If you remember, Eva is her deaf, artistically talented classmate from art class. She goes over to Eva's house where she meets her hedgehog, and she sees that she lives in a trailer with her trashy, abusive father. After that, Alyssa's at the dance company cult situation where there's a mention of being baptized, and she's not invited, but she's instructed to take off her splint and dance. It's during this dance that she actually accidentally touches another girl and ends up transferring all of her pain and her broken bone to that other girl, and everybody kind of gets mad and doesn't want anything to do with Alyssa. The next day, Alyssa continues wearing the splint because it would be weird if she didn't and was suddenly better. Eva comes over to her house and the two of them work on homework, with Alyssa noticing there are more abusive marks on Alyssa's body. Alyssa meets with Sam and asks about the pain transfer thing. Sam says she really can't talk about it until Alyssa's officially baptized. The next day at school, Alyssa's wearing provocative clothing for some reason. Like, I get that she's overly sexualized herself, but at times certain details don't feel necessary in this because it doesn't particularly add or change to the story, and it's not always there anyway, and it's not even appreciated within the confines of the story either. Anyway, Collins chooses this moment to confront Alyssa about the older guy who's been waiting for her outside of the school. Collins calls Sean a pedophile and tells Alyssa that she has been raped by this guy. Alyssa rejects all of that, and Collins reveals that his mother was also sexually abused for grades while she was in school, but now she's a successful journalist raising awareness about sex abuse in schools. Alyssa breaks down, and Collins promises not to tell anyone if that's what Alyssa wants. Alyssa promises that she won't see Sean anymore, and they part after a kiss. Now enter chapters summarizing time passage between the dance cult, healing, being at work, and being ignored by Elliot, versus also ignoring Elliot back and dancing for customers to get more tips because Alyssa apparently loves dancing now. Eventually, Elliot apologizes to Alyssa for giving her the cold shoulder and Alyssa accepts. Fast forward now to a weekend-long trip with Sean when he's going to do his best to convince her to come back to the United States, but also sex her really freaking hard because that's what he does. Alyssa agrees to come on the vacation, but only if Sean takes her back by Sunday so she's there in time for the dance club. While driving out of London to their getaway cottage, the two stop at a diner where the waitress hits on Sean to get his number because she thinks that he is Alyssa's father. Alyssa gets jealous and tells the chick that that's not her dad, that's her boyfriend. This actually reminds me of a moment from the end of American Psycho where Patrick is telling some people at a party that he's killed people because he wants to get a response. He wants them to acknowledge what he's done and who he is, but they don't, and it drives him further crazy, really, because all they do is shrug it off and thinks that he's joking. Alyssa does the same thing here, more or less, crying for help in the sassy way that she does, but knowing that the waitress won't tell the police about this because she's been ignored for such a long time already. At the cottage, obviously, Sean and Alyssa are getting jiggy with it really, really hard, with Sean using sex as a weapon and a punishment as he's gotten used to doing. He keeps telling Alyssa it's time to go home, and she finally agrees after he's pretty much brutally raped her. Yeah, like when I say sex is being used as a punishment, I mean he's making her bleed and in pain, and does it harder when they disagree or when they argue. So now that they've decided that she's going to go home, they have to come up with a reason for why she can go home or why she can't stay there anymore suddenly, since she'd wanted to go there so bad on her own. Sean gives Alyssa a snuff bullet to drop at school so she can get expelled for a drug problem, because that's reason enough to get sent home. Sean also encourages Alyssa to try coke there because he's got more little snuff bottles, and it's better that she try it with him than to try it with somebody who would take advantage of her. Pretty much the whole time they bang until they pass out, and Alyssa wakes up in the middle of the night feeling restless. She grabs another snuff bullet from Sean's kit and wanders outside into the cold. She makes her way towards a dock and eventually falls into the water, kind of committing suicide, but she still fights her way back to the shore, where she gets into the house freezing hypothermic and climbs into the shower to try to warm up. All of this noise wakes up Sean, and he sees the condition she's in, and he tries to help her back to health. A couple of times he picks up the phone, but he doesn't actually call for an ambulance or the police, because if they saw what was going on, he would get arrested, so he doesn't actually do that. Also, at this point, Alyssa's not mad at Sean anymore, and I have two theories on this. One is just inconsistent motives, which happens throughout stories regularly, from not catching stuff during revision. But then the other thing is that Alyssa may only be able to think straight when she's not around Sean. But when she's around him, she's so emotionally damaged by what she's been through with him. It changes how she thinks and feels, which makes her make irrational decisions. And I think that is a plausible answer for the type of things that Alyssa has been through. While passed out, she has a dream of the memory of being called a witch by the guy who wanted to eat her fingers. Yeah, it is kind of random. Come Sunday, Sean doesn't want to take Alyssa back like they had agreed, but eventually Alyssa convinces him using tears, and he drives her back to the dance studio. She also gives him back the bullet that she was going to drop at school, because since she threw one of them into the lake, he was short one, and he was like, excuse me. So she gives him back that one. Kind of making the whole snuff thing feel pointless. Flashback now to Alyssa finding out that she's pregnant. She's trying to get Sean's attention while he's on the phone, and all he wants to do is get sexy while doing that business. She finally gets him when she blurts it out. Sean's then pushing her to get an abortion when she says, "I never said that it was yours," and he gets insanely jealous. As you might imagine, he rapes her, because that's what he does when he wants to punish her. At the end of it all, he asks if she would really sleep with somebody else, and she says no, and then he feels bad for having raped her. Flash forward to Sean dropping Alyssa off at the dance studio. He wants to go in and watch, and she says no, only members can go in and watch. So Sean locks the doors so she can't get out of the car, and Alyssa loses it, saying that she doesn't want to ever see Sean again. He's about to rape her again, because obviously, that's his go-to, when she tells him that she feels disgusted every time they're together. He tells her to get out of the car and then drives off. If it was just that easy, really, right? Alyssa can't think on anything now anymore and is thinking of calling Sean. Eventually, hottie teacher Damian Cross asks her to come see him after class, while Collins puts the moves on Alyssa and keeps asking her out. Now she finally agrees to go and do something with him, and they're making out in the lunchroom, though Alyssa is not really a fan of PDA, so she says, why don't we go into another room? In that room, of course the two of them have sex. Afterwards, Alyssa tells Collins to wait there so that they can sneak out of the room separately so nobody gets the wrong idea, and he's like, I don't want to keep this a secret because I think I love you. Alyssa does not know how to deal with this, and she does not have an exit strategy for feelings. For somebody else's feelings. Meeting with hottie teacher Damian Cross, he asks her about the man that's twice her age that's always waiting for her outside. This is where she loses her shit, because she thinks that Collins has betrayed her, told Mr. Hottie Teacher all of her secrets, and now she says if he says anything, she'll accuse him of sexually assaulting her. When that doesn't work, she accuses him of wanting this information so that he can blackmail her to have sex with her, and she also offers him sex to keep her secret. This just shows how super fragile and broken of a person she is, but also she's not terribly likable. But that's nothing new. Hottie teacher Damian Cross then tells Alyssa that she can trust him if she ever feels unsafe. Then she leaves. Alyssa runs into Collins outside and is just an overall bitch and snaps at him for telling hottie teacher Damian Cross anything about her and Sean when he promised that he never would. Collins denies any part in any of this, but she doesn't believe him. Going to dance class, Alyssa is kicked out immediately for not being committed enough. Alyssa gets angry and a thunderstorm forms across the dance floor, knocking out all of the mirrors before she leaves. I don't really know why this next section is in the book, but it's just like Alyssa going shopping, Elliot waiting for her outside the school, asking her on a date, they go to an escape room, they go to a buffet, they sneak into a dance club where Elliot goes, "You look lonely," and then Alyssa says she's not interested in dating Elliot. So I really don't know why this whole section was in there. It's just a bunch of pages, mostly summary, that don't change anything. And it would make sense if more time was spent with Elliot, but this book is all over the place with so many different groups of people that are so disconnected, disjointed from each other, that this didn't really feel like it fit in there. Skip through the rest of the semester and summer with a summary as working and finding a new dance studio because she's not allowed anymore at Maya's, and people to hang out with. This kind of stuff I really don't like the whole summary thing. And it was one of my problems with His Name Was Augustine, and I always pull this out for other stories that do the same thing. When you summarize actions and whole segments of stuff, like minor summaries are fine, but when you do summaries of like whole segments of stuff and time passages, it pulls me out of the story as literally nothing is happening but the time skip. And often you can just skip over time skips and get to where you need to be. But these areas read like the author is skipping the boring parts so you can get to the better parts, when all you really needed was like 1 or 2 sentences to say, "And now it's after summer." We don't need to know what they did all summer if nothing important happened all summer. These longer summary spaces only prove to decharacterize, depersonify, and cheapen relationships that have already been established or that you're attempting to establish. For me, I think it's actually better, and obviously it varies depending on your writing style, but doing these summary time skips can actually make a relationship seem cheaper than just skipping and assuming a relationship developed in the non-talked about time. But again, there are no overall clear rules on this, because your writing style heavily depends on how effective the tools of the trade you use work in your story. Now we're in senior year, and Alyssa says that she's not talking to Sean anymore. She just sits down with Eva at school and notices there are more burns, more abuse, more stuff from her dad. Alyssa feels bad because she's known that Eva's father has been abusing her, but she's done nothing about it. So skip through more classes. Also, I wanted to note that Alyssa somehow got into senior year while skipping out on religious education class for her entire previous semester. I don't understand how she passed the semester while skipping an entire class, but apparently it doesn't really matter. Now, Alyssa walks by haughty teacher Damien Cross's classroom and takes a seat. She listens to him talk about Adam and Eve, the 2 interpretations around the story, and then asks why God didn't strike down his own creation and start over after humanity failed to resist temptation. Honestly, I'm not sure why Alyssa couldn't have been in this class / heard this in the previous semester when she was taking this class, rather than having to completely skip the semester just to make her sit in a class she's not in anymore. It just makes the time skip read even more bizarre to me. And then to make it worse, instead of playing this scene out again, we have what turns out to be one of the biggest bummers of the story. It summarizes what could have been an interesting moment to reveal various thoughts on different people's approach to the same question, the same moral and overarching religious afterlife question. Instead, we just get this, quote, "With those thought-provoking questions, he opened the forum for debate. Every contribution was equally welcomed with a pair of gray, reassuring eyes. Even the comments that sounded completely idiotic, never discriminating between right or wrong answers. Mr. Cross considered each one thoughtfully and replied with another question. The way he navigated the discussion always made me think of a maestro waving a baton. Somehow the sounds we made seemed to go exactly where he wanted them to go. We had started talking about religion, but suddenly we were talking about mythology and history, psychology and evolution, existentialism and nihilism. He integrated new themes into the discourse so seamlessly, you barely noticed how he made us all jump from one aneurysm-inducing subject to the next." End quote. The text implies a rich conversation that could have very, very directly related to the themes of the book, and Alyssa's circumstances and Alyssa's inability to resist her own temptations or her own impulses and what she thinks about life, especially as she's tried to commit suicide before. But instead, we get this and we don't really get the thick conversation that this is actually set up for, which was super disappointing. After class, Alyssa sticks around to ask hottie teacher Damien Cross to help with dealing with Eva's situation. On the way home from school, Alyssa calls Douglas to get some drugs to, knock somebody out, and turns out he's broken up with Katie. Alyssa still calls him over to hang out if he wants to anyway, and she also purchases a murder kit on her way home from school. Pretty much like zip ties and tape and the stuff. If you don't, I guess that's just me. Over at Eva's house, they order pizza. Alyssa drugs Eva until she passes out, and then she also drugs Eva's dad. When she finally has the upper hand, she seduces him and gets near him until he's pretty much passive from the drugging. And then she threatens his cock that if he doesn't treat Eva better and get a job, things are not going to end well for him. This way too much also reminds me of the fourth book of His Name is Augustine, when Swanee is hunting down her friend's husband who is abusing her and threatens him from her ethereal form. So nothing bad can actually happen to her, but she is all powerful. And so now she was going all freaking woman power on this guy, and that she needs to stop hurting the wife or she will hurt him. From her all powerful form. Now call me a bigot or whatever, but random female empowerment revenge stories are not really my jam, and this didn't feel like it fit in with what was going on at this point. But then again, the whole Eva plotline didn't really feel like it fit in either. Alyssa is so self-centered and so self-involved for the majority of this book, which is fair. She's got so many problems and so much going on, I don't think that she really would be noticing what's going on with other people. But that just makes this so much more weird. Aside from trying to put some throwaway character into the book to give Alyssa a chance to look like a hero, because she kind of looks like a bitch most of the time. But I just don't think that is part of the book one story. So it really stood out as inappropriate and it didn't mesh with the rest of what was going on. Anyway, Alyssa puts the cigarette she's got back into the old man's mouth and it explodes, taking his face with it. Doesn't seem like he died though, because Alyssa is still talking to him. She could be crazy at this point, but I don't think that is entirely it. Moving forward, we got another scene with Sean and Alyssa in Quebec, where he's trying to get her to get an abortion for the baby that she's got, and she lies about something when she's taken to the clinic to give her a chance to run away, and then she goes home. Her dog dies of cancer, and the same night she has a miscarriage. Then flash forward a little more to Sean learning about Alyssa going to go live with her mom, and he sneaks into her room, tries to convince her not to leave, rapes her, and then she says she's not going to leave. Obviously a lie, because she leaves anyway. Fast forward now again to the current time where Alyssa is leaving Eva's house. She's called an ambulance, and now we switch to Alyssa suddenly thinking about all the broken mirrors at the dance studio, because that was actually never reflected upon before, but now is the time to spend 1 or 2 sentences reflecting on it. Alyssa returns home, tries to sleep. She can't. Douglas shows up, and they take some drugs together, and she gives Douglas a blowjob, and then Katie walks in, sees it happening, throws a fit. Alyssa's mom smacks her across the face. Alyssa leaves, runs into Elliot, who takes her inside because she's high and she's crazy and she's shirtless, and so he just takes care of her like a good gentleman all night until she is ready to leave, and then she's pretty much like, I never saw those guys again. She never got to say a proper goodbye. It was her exact words in this situation. And it's kind of weird because the story is set up so that it's reading like she's looking back. At the beginning of at the end of the first chapter, there's some line in there that said this was something to do with her father before he forgot who she was. So that indicates somebody looking back from the future, they're reflecting on something that happened. But in this case, she says, I never saw them. I never got to give them a proper goodbye, which may also be her looking back saying that they'll never show up in the story again. But then that makes every instance where Elliot and Andrew, but specifically Elliot, any situation with Elliot and Damien, feel like a waste of time, because you had all of these weird situations with the werewolf thing and Damien talking to Elliot and Elliot being Damien's son or adopted son in a way. I think that's what he said. And she's never going to see him again. So whatever supernatural thing was going on with them is never coming back. Or this isn't accurate to where it's going to go. And the voice at the beginning is weird. Either way, there's something going on here that's not accurate. Back at the dance studio, Alyssa sees hottie teacher Damian Cross talking to Maya about how Alyssa just needs to be marked already so she can get it over with and be protected. Hottie teacher Damian Cross offers Alyssa a ride home, and during this, Alyssa asks what they mean by marking someone. Apparently, it's something about relinquishing more than your human soul to someone else. The conversation is pretty vague, and the trade-off and reason for why you would do this isn't really said, but we all know how the supernaturally adjacent talk in vague terms pretty much constantly. His most direct answer is telling Alyssa that she'd have to give up discernment, will, and calling in order to be marked, I think. Hottie teacher Damian Cross also tells Alyssa that she's a witch and her emotions control her powers. Alyssa's like, okay, that makes sense. Thanks for telling me now, but why didn't you tell me anything before? Again, this reads really odd because I don't feel like there has been much of a build-up to this exposure. If you think about all of the previous stuff that happened, and I know I'm skipping a lot to try to make this fit into a blurb, but if there was more supernatural stuff, then I would mention it. But there really just hasn't been, aside from what I already mentioned, unless I completely missed a bunch of stuff. Maybe I did. But especially with her powers being brought about by her emotions and controlled by her emotions, she's had so many situations where it was high emotional intensity, be it the rape or the suicide situations, that none of her powers seeped out when she was being attacked by Sean or killing herself. There were so many different ways in which they could manifest to slowly trickle this stuff in, and that could have even been a reason why she ran away from Sean in the first place, not a pregnancy. And it would have been more dramatic, but the pregnancy plot and running away from this guy who groomed her that she's actually in love with, but it is kind of not a good situation to be in, makes more sense for one story, but so does having these powers that respond to trauma and emotion. But they're like in the same story, but they don't connect. They're like just parallel, but not interacting in any way that makes sense. I will say that this reveal feels appropriate for pacing, being at the 2/3 point of the way through. It just reads like it's a setup that wasn't put in place in the rest of the book to be revealed at this point. Alyssa then asks hottie teacher Damian Cross why he kissed her neck on that day, and he says, well, that's something that shouldn't have happened, and I've got no excuse for it. So apparently that is what she saw happen. And all he says is pretty much that, and you bear something that I desire, something I dare not hope to take for myself, though my longing for it is crueler than a caustic wound aches for water. He explains that she has the light of the Father in her. Alyssa is ready to give herself over to Damian, even though he's like, no, I want it, but I don't want to want it, you know? And Alyssa's like, please, Daddy, do it for me. And she holds Damian's hand, hoping that it'll convince him. But he's like, no. He holds her hand back, but he's also like, no. Alyssa gets embarrassed because she's been rejected by hottie teacher Damian Cross, and she is very sensitive, so she goes running out of the car, in which case hottie teacher chases after her, grabs her, a flow of light interrupts everything, nobody gets hurt, and then she's dropped off at home, everything is fine. Alyssa still hasn't seen her mother, she's kind of disappeared. And next day at school, Alyssa is being picked up by Sean when Sam sees her, and Sam tries to persuade Alyssa to not get into the car. And that's when Alyssa realizes that Sam was the one that told hottie teacher Damian Cross about the situation. So then Alyssa calls her a whore, gets in the car, and then they're driving. So while they're driving, Sean is pretty much like, I'm taking you home. Your dad doesn't care about you. I'm the only one that cares about you because obviously I'm the only one here every time you're in trouble, every time you've ever been in trouble. I've always been the one that's here for you, so I'm taking you home, I'm keeping you in my house, and I'm taking care of you like your parents never did because I actually love you. And he's like, you know what? I had the relationship with you to protect you from the predators that work with your father, because as long as you were with me, you couldn't be with them. And he says that he put his life on the line to bang an underage child so that other men wouldn't. Sean, you openly raped a teenager, possibly a preteen, multiple times. Brutally raped her even because of anger. And you didn't want her to leave. It was a control mechanism. You are a broken man and possibly a liar, if not straight up delusional. Anyway, during this scene, they fight. He's like, you're coming back to New York. Alyssa says, fuck you, I hate you. Her emotions get out of control and they drive off a bridge. She's rescued from the water by hottie teacher Damien Cross, who comes out of nowhere, and Sean dies. They're taken to the precinct where Alyssa kind of has to wait around until she's released by her guardian to come and get her, but he's not there. But still, hottie teacher Damien Cross and Alyssa hang out for some reason, and they're talking about manipulating Alyssa's father so that he will let her stay in the UK if she wants to stay in the UK, but manipulation using magic also comes with unpredictable changes. So Alyssa's like, nah, let's not do that. I do question Damien giving this opportunity when he has seen how damaged and broken and the types of decisions that Alyssa makes. But it really, the mention of the unpredictable changes of the mind feels like setting up a plot change or a plot for book 2, because it's also, Damien also mentions that he's got a brother who is hunting Alyssa at this point, and we're at like 85% of the way through this book. This is the first time Damien has mentioned a brother at any point, and so really now that we're in that last 20%, it feels more like it's setting up for book 2 rather than closing out book 1, if that makes sense. Alyssa's father arrives at the precinct and starts talking to the cops. Somehow, Alyssa is allowed to walk off on her own, and she returns home, where her mother's things are all moved out, except the Valium is still there. So Alyssa starts downing Valium, and then hottie teacher Damien Cross shows up and takes her out and takes her to the dance studio, saying, we have to save her now. And so he leaves her with them, and they do their blood ritual thing, and she sprouts wings, and everybody gets scared, and somebody in that group tries to kill her. Oh yeah, and her mother's house was being ripped apart by the magical influence that Alyssa controls way back when she was taking the Valium, because obviously her emotions destroy everything. So that house was being destroyed when Damien went in there and grabbed her. After the ritual with the wings, Alyssa is brought back to her house where her dad is trying to get inside, and the cops are all there because the house has collapsed and he thinks his daughter is inside. But then Alyssa comes over and he's like, oh wow, okay, cool. And then the two of them go back to the United States together, and they deal with Sean's funeral services together and help the family with the funeral. And then Alyssa's father is looking at the paperwork, and Sean's will says everything that he owns goes to Alyssa. And this is where Dad is kind of like, was something going on? And Alyssa screams at him about having never paid attention, and Sean was the only person that ever cared for her. And then she runs to her room, locks herself in there, and continually calls his voicemail to just hear his voice until she falls asleep. And that is the end of the book. Again, this was a highly abridged version because there were a lot of things going on in this book, so I encourage you to check it out for yourself if you would like to get more of the pieces and more context for exactly what was going on. But I tried to grab what I could that seemed like big deal things that moved the story in a direction, if you know what I mean. I mean, even like, and I grabbed some of the things that also seemed out of place so that I could talk about them here, because if I didn't mention them, then you'd wonder what I was talking about. So the first thing that I want to talk about in the commentary is the trauma presented in this book. Alyssa is very clearly a victim of child sexual abuse and grooming. She was also a victim of parental neglect, which put her in the dangerous position to begin with. The complications rose as she never learned boundaries, which came through in her sexualizing every relationship she had with boys and how she thought everyone else related to one another. Her lack of impulse control also showed in the budding of a likely sex addiction. I thought the trauma and contrast of Alyssa's perspective on Sean was handled very well in this. She couldn't hate him because of the way that she felt towards him because of the long-running relationship that they'd had, and, as she said, he is the only person that ever showed that he cared about her. But she also showed signs of Stockholm Syndrome as she recognized when Sean was abusive, and she also hated him, typically around the times of him being abusive. She also wanted to love him and forgive him and hoped for the best for the both of them in the future. She thought better when she wasn't around him, but couldn't resist him when he was talking to her or when he was around her. This was all part of showing her desperation for the love and support she didn't think she would get elsewhere, and the mental place that she was in where she thought that all she had was Sean. She also showed fear that everyone always wanted something from her and the vulnerability that didn't allow her to trust. This book is brutal in this relationship because Alyssa is not a smart person. She's also extremely damaged and flawed. it can actually make it difficult to handle sometimes. You wouldn't want to get too into this book with the expectation that you're going to like or identify with Alyssa. She's cynical and mean and randomly violent, with excessively detailed violent thoughts filtering through her head from time to time that they actually didn't really feel necessary or natural with all of her other stuff going on. They just added to the excess of negativity that made her harder to enjoy. The author shined in expressing this complicated relationship, though, past and the consequences of the related trauma, which, considering the subject matter, it's very difficult to do. Going into the characters, Alyssa could have benefited from at least a couple of moments of vulnerability to show that at least one strength or positive that she had. I mean, she's pretty loyal considering Sean, but she also turned on him a couple of times too. So she was always harsh and using people, negative, mean, and violent. So everything felt really heavy all the time. And she was excessively caustic. Some of the violence was with specific random thoughts, like cutting people's heads off because of a disagreement, or, quote, stab him in the nipple with a fork. Now, some of that feels like edgy teenage stuff, but she dropped way too many mentions of harming people that it wasn't just being a quirky teenager to me. Like I said, the portrayals of Alyssa's coming sex addiction were well done. It not only shows in how she relates to other people, talking about sex, getting into sex, casual things with people, but also how casual she is about other people and assuming their sexual relationships. From her mother and Katie to Mom and Damian Cross, and even Andrew and Elliot, when she met them, she assumed they were sleeping together. She constantly is thinking about sex and who is hooking up with who. What bothered me with all of the side characters was every male character wanting to get with Alyssa. Now, initially, I thought that this was going to be used as something supernatural that drew them to her, especially when it looked like witches were involved in the story and a handful of people made references to how Alyssa looked so much like her mother in a very specific way. I thought there was a supernatural bend to this. After talking with the author a bit, I was told that this was just using a YA trope of all the boys wanting the MC. I think that's unfortunate because this could have been used for a deeper story reason, and it being a shallow reason shows through and cheapens the story, especially as you mix in magical realism into the story. You can do so much with magical realism. I also wanted to mention that by chapter 13, I was pretty much over Alyssa, totally, because everything just stacked up so much, and she was so negative. I didn't want anything to do with her anymore. But then she's a complete ass to Elliot for no reason whatsoever. She's unrepentant and having no moments of softness at all. Everyone is still throwing themselves at her, though, and it being with that trope of everybody just loving her because she's the MC hurts me a lot. I get being a damaged person and having a harder personality, having defense mechanisms up, but then when you add in the YA tropes of the main character girl getting everything they want and everybody wanting them, it just makes it harder to swallow as a realistic take of anything. I think lightening up on the tropes and giving them story reasons to exist if you're going to play with them would actually strengthen this book and give the ability for Alyssa to show some flexibility and vulnerability that would make her more relatable or give her variations instead of just being a selfish, mean, violent person that everybody wants regardless. So with genre expectations, I'm sure that you saw it with the Fresh Meat feature. I was told that this was a supernatural thriller. For me, it actually felt more like a literary novel with magical realism elements. The magical elements felt like they should have been brought in earlier and spread out more to build into the explanation that comes at 2/3 of the way through the book. As it is now, the majority of the plot just revolves around Alyssa's relationship with Sean and the world, as well as her disconnection with her parents and anyone trying to care about her. So anyone going into this for paranormal thriller may be disappointed that that's not actually what you get in this book. Now, maybe it'll be heavier in the future books, but it is not the focus of this book at all. Also, bringing up genre means talking a bit about the tropes, so one of which was the every male character falling in love with the main character. Another is that Alyssa is good at pretty much everything she wants and succeeds at everything she tries when she tries it. Her job, her new school, her dancing, everything. Even when she had broken bones, They did not affect her, and her life went on as usual, only with her having to give in to like going on a date with Collins or something. This is the novel trying to capture various YA tropes to appeal to a YA audience, but really, in my opinion, it cheapens the book by distracting from the substance of the novel to appeal to shallow tropes when it's not even that kind of book, especially when dealing with sexual addiction, grooming, and predatory adult behavior / pedophilia. This book has so much going on for it, it doesn't need to try to appeal to YA tropes that are really just going to cheapen the message that is in this book or the themes that are in this book. Because of the perspective and characters, though, the dialogue was snappy and often really fun. The author did a great job with connecting dialogue, and the dialogue was very natural most of the time. This novel also has a very strong narrative voice, internal first person, strengthening the literary aspect. Now keep in mind, the way that this is marketed, or at least was marketed when I was initially sent it, mentioning Edward Cullen in the blurb led me to believe that there'd be vampires or some sort of supernatural creature really involved in the plot. Like we had that werewolf come in at maybe 1/3 of the way in, maybe a little more than that. And that interactions with Damien Cross gave me that feeling the most of this vampire romantic feeling because of how fast the main character fell for him. But it never came to that. Building expectations that were never met, this might disappoint some readers, especially when Mr. Damien Cross is featured on the cover. You're going to think he plays a bigger role than he actually ends up doing. So that's something to look out for. You're setting reader expectations and then not delivering quite on them, which can make some readers very not happy. When it comes to pacing and structure, this book felt like it had 3 different plots from 3 completely different books for 3 completely different audiences, none of which connected to each other. It was all that, like, just barely missing each other thing. One of these plots was the literary fiction about Alyssa's relationship with Sean. The next was a supernatural bit, which included Damien Cross, Elliot, and whatever relationship they had, and the cult stuff. The final thing was the slice of life with work and school and Eva, and though I could see some of these overlapping, like 2 of them at a time, the changing focus was so jarring, and the characters were almost all partitioned off in ways that they didn't interact with each other. Like, Eva didn't interact with anybody. She was just her own thing over there, not even Collins or Sam or anybody. I'm not sure why this was the choice, or if it was done for more mass appeal, trying to feed into different genres and mix them together to try to get that appeal. But I think that it would have been better served by combining just 2 of the ideas and leaning into them, like having the Sean and magical awakening and getting away from the situation because of her magic awakening and hurting him and that weird stuff going on, instead of the pregnancy even. I don't know, the pregnancy focus took me out of the magical thing and again felt more like a literary fiction, but it might be if you just took out one of the 3 subjects and then kept everything from the other 2 and mixed them together, it would have worked. But at the moment, I don't think all of these little tiny things necessarily worked together. The book is mostly fast-paced up until you get to the sections that didn't feel like they belonged, and like one of the obscure switch genre chapters sections or the summary chapters that read out of place. Like, why even bother going on a date with Elliot? It affects nothing, had nothing to do with anything, and changed nothing in the plot. It was just like, here's a couple pages of going on a date just so she could tell him, by the way, I'm never gonna date you. More on the pacing, by chapter 13 / halfway through, it feels like the novel started to do a lot more of the skipping to the good parts with the summary, and I was checking out by that point because it was getting so far away from what it felt like it was, because it was getting so far away from its own focus. The creep factor. There's no getting around how creepy and predatory Sean is when he calls someone he's talking to buddy or says grown up and then kisses them. Like, if you have to use the word grown up with somebody, they're too young for you to be macking on. Also interesting is that you can see the ideas that Sean shaped inside of Alyssa from when she was young by the things that she repeats that she's heard from him. So that was an interesting juxtaposition, and I liked seeing the influence of what Sean said to her when she was young and what she repeated as a teenager as what she believed in. It showed just how substantially Sean affected Alyssa's life. Also, never trust a dude who says, I forget how young you are, you act so mature for your age. Oh yeah, and Sean introducing Alyssa to porn as like a preteen or a teenager, there's no fixing how much creepy this is with everything that he did and went through with this kid. Readers who romanticize this, I have to ask, who hurt you? I am going to mention this brief, bizarre description of sexual excitement when the narrator said, quote, "a weird tingling sensation running down my womb." I don't think that the womb has anything to do with sexual pleasure generally, but take that as you will from somebody not experienced. I just don't typically see people talking about the womb feeling pleasure. Now, these are just going to be my random questions or thoughts that I had that I couldn't really categorize. I'm not sure why Alyssa mentally says that she didn't sleep on the plane when she's in the after section of the first chapter, when she says, I was having the weirdest dream when she wakes up in that chapter. I'm not sure why the whole section with Eva was necessary, but I already went into that, so I'm not going to repeat it. Where did the werewolf go, and why did it never come back? And was that anything to do with Elliot? Because we had that whole talking with Damien saying you need to keep this a secret shortly after that, but then nothing ever came of any of that. The school situation confused me. She changed mid-semester, said that it was a public school, but had to be interviewed and given acceptance, and then after the interview, they said that she would hear back in a few weeks. Were they going to admit her during finals week? There was this thing that was mentioned a couple of times where her eyes filled with red mist, and I wasn't sure if that was supposed to be signifying anger or tunnel vision, or if it was something supernatural, because it just seemed so obscure that it might have been something magical, but it's just another one of those things that felt like a red herring. Then we've got when Alyssa meets Eva, there is this instant adoration that felt really bizarre and even kind of forced. Alyssa was cut off from everybody else in the story and had a hard time relating to people, period. Yet when she sees Eva, she says that she's deaf, and immediately it's like, whoa. So Eva kind of felt like a place to give Alyssa a moment to be a savior and didn't read as genuine. Every scene with Eva was sped up through summary to kind of establish a relationship, but not actually make it matter, leaving the feeling even more that it was unnecessary and thrust in there for some arbitrary reason. Also, with how caustic Alyssa was, her excessive adoration of Eva not only felt unearned, but almost like pandering because you couldn't be mean or ignore somebody who's deaf and poor and abused. The whole plot line over there just didn't feel natural at all. Also, the frick kind of teenager just decides to put together a murder kit and tie up someone's dad. Alyssa is volatile and insane, but like, that came out of nowhere, and it's kind of a big step to create a murder kit to go after somebody. Again, it's part of that feeling like it was doing too much. I have to wonder why Damien Cross's necklace and gloves are on the cover of the book when he plays such a minor role in the novel itself. Just another sign that I think this book tried to do too many things and it got distracted from its own purpose, which was the push and pull between Sean and Damien, and, you know, the supernatural and the natural life that was on both sides. At least that's the vibe that I got that was supposed to be the focus of this book, but ended up not being the focus. But I could also entirely see that perhaps at some point Sean might have been used/manipulated by some evil being trying to groom Alyssa for future placement, if you know what I mean. So that also could have been an area for it to go in. I think it would have been nice if Alyssa's draw to dance wasn't so random for her to just find a hobby to save her life, but rather it used a mystical draw to bring her to her destiny, because the two could have been combined, so it was less obvious that a hobby can save your life sort of message was there, especially when playing with magical realism. Magic can be used to enhance meaning behind action and choices, and could have been used here to combine that saving life hobby and part of the plot. Some of the stuff of her analyzing her own situation was good, and I specifically liked the line, quote, "It's funny how much the average person is willing to overlook to avoid open confrontation." After she talked to the waitress and knew that she wasn't going to get any help. This line specifically is the story of her life so far, and also part of what she hated about her dad. She resented him for neglecting her, and it's only one more reason why she liked Sean. He acknowledged her pain, but he also caused her pain that everyone else was ignoring. So it was just a revolving door of her life, and the most clear expression of Alyssa's POV. Ultimately, with this book, I really enjoyed the characterization, and I just wish it chose more of what it wanted to be so that it could have more focused on bringing that out, because the character voices were strong. The representation of the The trauma was strong and well done, but it just went all over the place and never quite connected all of the little pieces that it inserted. This resulted in red herrings, pointless interactions, a complete vibe switch, and a feeling of a brand new random plot being introduced at 85%. The romancing with Damien feeling completely out of place beyond Alyssa's desperate obsession to be saved and her love of older men drawing her to him. But the focus wasn't there enough for it to be much more than that. The ending of the book makes it much more clear that this story is about Sean, Alyssa, and Alyssa's father, her desperation to be seen and saved, and much of this book deals with how she hopes Sean will save her because she believes in no one else, but she also knows that he's the villain of her life. When Damien enters, he could have been the proper balance to Sean's lack of self-control and over-sexualization. But by the time Alyssa's telling him, "I trust you," we got no chances to see them build that relationship. It just sort of happens, and in part, it's out of lust because Alyssa likes her older mans. Alyssa also never really reflects on any of the damage that she's done when magical things start happening until it's convenient. Another symptom that the book tried to do too much, I think. Also, just this obligatory statement that let's go back to the cops getting Alyssa's witness statement by being bad at their jobs by contaminating the witness with what they think happened and telling her to answer their questions based on what they think happened, feeding her information, not asking her what happened with open-ended questions, and then correcting her when she gave her ideas. This is bad. This is bad policing. This is how you ruin a witness. So, just that, obviously, I now have to mention that on every story when there's some sort of representation like this of eyewitness or interrogation or something like that, because it's so wrong all the time, and it just makes all of your cops look bad. Like, they're corrupt kind of bad. So anyway, that is my review discussion of A New Calling by Sylvian Breker. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. I know there was so much going on in this book. It's a lot going on in a little bit of time because I think it's about 350 pages. So if you'd like to check it out, it's down in the description below, and I look forward to hearing from you. With that said, thank you so much for watching. Hope you have a great week or weekend, and don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out? The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross. Is he in trouble? We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him. Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Why? Did you do that? To the left, plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?